I wonder, have you ever longed for something? Really, really longed for it, perhaps for a very, very long time. And what happens if you get it? But it's not quite how you expected it was going to be. In fact, you're confused by it and don't understand what's happening. This isn't how you planned it in your mind. It wasn't meant to be like this. And so you do or say something inappropriate out of your confusion and surprise. This is what happens to Peter in today's gospel reading. And I must say, I think if I were in Peter's shoes, I would probably have said something very similar. The Jewish people had longed for a Messiah, a person anointed by God to return his people to faithful worship, a person who would make three key things happen so that the people of God could once more be the people of God. Firstly, this person would rebuild or cleanse the temple so its focus would once more be on God rather than making money and lining the pockets of those in authority. Secondly, he would be anointed the rightful successor to King David's throne, removing the puppet kings, Herod and others, who occupied that throne only at the behest of the Romans. And third, this person would drive out those occupying Romans, so returning Judea to the Jewish people. This was the Messiah the Jewish people awaited and had longed for a very, very long time. And then at the point that you realize you found the Messiah, the person who would make all this happen, the very person you had given up your business as a fisherman to follow, this person tells you that he must suffer, be rejected, must be killed, die. That doesn't sound like the Messiah you've been expecting. Okay, he says something about rising again, whatever he might mean by that, but this isn't how it's meant to be. The Messiah is meant to defeat those who stand in his way of restoring God's people. He's not meant to be killed by them. This is not how it's meant to be. And so Peter points this out. In the version we heard, we're told that Peter rebukes Jesus. It seems rather harsh, but rebuke being another word for criticize and admonish or even to scold. But it perhaps points to Peter's disappointment in what this person, who moments before he thought was the Messiah, was now saying. Interestingly, in Luke's account of this event, we're not told that anyone raises an objection to Jesus' prediction, whilst in Matthew we are also told what Peter said when he took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you." This doesn't sound too harsh to me, but still it gets the same reaction. Get behind me, Satan. This might seem an overreaction from Jesus, especially as I'm sure that Peter's rebuking of Jesus, though out of confusion, was also out of concern and care for him. He didn't want his teacher to die. A perfectly natural reaction, I suspect, we have all felt for our teachers. Well, hopefully we've all felt for our teachers. And therefore, Jesus' response, with its similarity to how he responded to his temptations by the devil when he was in the wilderness at the start of his ministry. On that occasion, he said, "Away from me, Satan." But maybe Jesus' response, being the same as his response to the devil, is to be expected, because Just as the temptations of the devil were intended to derail the plan of the salvation of humanity and the restoration of our relationship with God, Peter's concern also risks putting the plan off track. And indeed, Jesus tells Peter that he is focused only on human concerns and doesn't understand the bigger picture, doesn't understand the concerns of God. Peter is focused on what he wants, what Peter expects, and not on God's plan. Now, for those of you who are sitting there worrying about Peter and his relationship with Jesus, Peter will get over being called Satan. He will continue to make further gaffes during the rest of the Gospels. And he'll make further mistakes, including denying 3 times that he even knows Jesus. But he will be restored into right relationship with him and will go on to bring a great many followers to Christ, as we read in the opening chapters of the book of Acts. Even though Peter repeatedly gets things wrong, he doesn't get up. He doesn't give up even. Eventually he, as the Americans might say, gets with the program and plays a major part in building the kingdom. But I think there's something else here for us to reflect on and from which we can learn. Mark's gospel is a great gospel to read, quite apart from the speed at which it progresses. If you want to sit down and read it in one go, it will take you about an hour to do so. And when I've done this, I've felt quite exhausted because the speed and the energy with which he tells his account, jumping from one thing to the next, moving on, giving very little time for us to dwell. But the other really noticeable thing is how critical Mark is of the disciples, how his account shows them as being very slow at getting what Jesus is talking about. His disciples don't come across as a particularly quick-witted bunch. This is perhaps because most scholars think that Mark was a follower of Peter, and so much of his account is probably what Peter told him. And so maybe Mark assumed that all the disciples struggled at times just as Peter did. And I think that this is perhaps helpful for us when we are struggling with Scripture. We can draw some comfort from the fact that the disciples also struggled with it. But of course, what the Gospel writer knows and knew when he sat down to write his account, he knew the outcome of what would happen. He knew what after 3 days rise again meant. As indeed do we, as over the years we have marked the crucifixion on Good Friday and then the resurrection on the following Sunday. But to the disciples, hearing Jesus say these words for the very first time, it must have been very confusing, especially after they'd just realized who Jesus was, realizing that Jesus was God's anointed one, the Messiah, or Christ. Messiah in Hebrew means anointed one, and Christ or Christo is the Greek translation of that. They had just realized that Jesus was the Messiah. And understandably, Peter's preoccupation is on what he knows and what's important to him. He hasn't yet understood the big picture and so naturally focuses on what he can comprehend. But that bit that impacts him, but that's not the full story. That's not the big picture. I wonder how often we do this. I wonder how often we only accept or take notice of the things that we understand, or indeed the things that reinforce what we expect to happen. And we act and react badly when presented with the unexpected. The media feeds on this today. It relies on this. It makes money by keeping us engaged in what they present to us, whether this is newspapers telling us stories that reinforce our view of things so that we continue to buy their papers each day or each week, or social media that continues to feed us material that its algorithms calculate will reinforce our views, so we spend longer on their platforms. In my case, Facebook knows that I have a love of whippets, and so offers me lots and lots of pictures of them. Something I must admit I quite enjoy, and I then bore Andrea with by showing her. But this risks that it reinforces our narrow view of the world and can make that view narrower and narrower. If I only hear what I already know, I don't learn new things. And of course, politicians have realized this as well. We can see it in the way political leaders like Donald Trump and Nigel Farage focus on immigration because they think it will reinforce the views of their supporters and so encourage them to continue watching and listening to them, and they hope in due course voting for them. But what this narrow approach doesn't do is show us the whole picture. For example, it doesn't show us the impact on a range of services not being able to recruit staff, or that a large proportion of our universities now are facing financial difficulties because there are restrictions on how many overseas students they can admit. These overseas students whose fees have been subsidising the fees of UK students for many, many years. Now, I use this only as an example to show how a narrow view of a subject can skew our understanding. If we don't understand the wider picture, the bit we see might mean we fail to understand what's really going on. Some of you might remember a television advert from some years ago. In fact, I looked it up. It's from 1986, and it was to advertise the Guardian newspaper. It showed in the opening shot a skinhead running around the corner of a street. The next view shows him grabbing at a man's briefcase as if he's trying to mug him. And then the camera moves out a bit to show what was really going on. And we see that the skinhead is actually pushing the man out of the way of a load of building materials that are falling from a scaffold above. Far from mugging the man, the skinhead has saved his life. And the caption at the end of the advert is, "It's only when you get the whole picture you can fully understand what's going on." If we only look at what we want to see and only allow ourselves to be blinkered by our prejudices and expectations, we can misunderstand and misjudge what is happening. This is what happens to Peter in this morning's reading. He was doing and being focused on human concerns, not having in mind the concerns of God. But this is all big stuff. We're dealing with stuff that is often beyond our comprehension, and so we shouldn't be surprised if we get confused by it. But what is important is that rather like Peter, when we get it wrong, we must not focus only on our view of the world and continue arguing with those who see things differently to us. We must not give up. Instead, like Peter, we must be open to learn. We must be open to see things differently. We must be open to see them from the perspective of others and be prepared to change and to try again. Amen.
We have some notices. Nadine.
Just one quick one from me. Wow, didn't some of us have a wonderful day yesterday? It was a full day. From the walk-in to the fun afternoon, then the barbecue. But these things don't just happen. And our first thank you must be to God for providing that wonderful weather yesterday. That was just amazing. So in your prayers, could you please thank God for yesterday in its entirety? But days like yesterday don't just happen. There's a lot of preparation and organisation beforehand. There's lots of help on the day, and there's lots of help washing up when the dishwasher doesn't play ball with us as well. So I would just like to express a huge thanks to everyone who made yesterday happen. So thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much. Over to you.
Thanks, Nadine. Quick notice about next Sunday from David Blackmore. So at the 9 o'clock and 10:45 services next Sunday, we're going to be celebrating Creation Tide. And as part of our journey towards Eco Church Silver, which is all very exciting, we've invited Dave Furs, who is from St. Peter's at Quarrendon, to come and talk about their community garden project and the impact that that's had on their ministry and outreach as a church. Also, as part of next Sunday's celebration of Creation Tide, ideally we would love you to either walk or cycle to church if you're able to do that, or to consider a lift share, just as we think about our use of the planet's resources and emissions, and also promoting a healthy and an active lifestyle. So do take part in that if you can. We have afternoon teas here this afternoon. The sun was shining when we came in. I think it will still be shining when we go out as well. So that's 2:30 to 4:30 this afternoon. And a reminder as well, this evening at 6 o'clock here in church, you can listen to Wendover Choral Society and the choir of St. Mary's Aylesbury in their Michaelmas Madrigals concert. And I believe that's madrigals interspersed with Shakespeare's sonnets. And I've heard some of the madrigals myself, and they are absolutely amazing. So do come along to that if you can. A quick reminder on behalf of Natalie Beach that I'm sure she would still love to have some volunteers for the wedding fair, which is on Saturday the 5th of October, and a sort of future date, a couple of future dates for your diaries. The barn dance is on Friday the 25th of October, and Matthew has asked me to talk about a quiz with a slight difference, probably with quotation marks around it. I'm sure probably the best way to find out what he means by that is by coming along, which is on Saturday the 30th of November. Very good. Those are all the notices, unless there's anything else from anybody. Sounds like a no.